Boom. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to discover how Mass Driver makes DevOps accessible to all engineers. Let's get this one started. Here we go.
Shut up and sit down.
Look, a business can give you everything you want in life. Prestige, wealth, freedom. It can also take everything away from you. This show is for those who are willing to take that risk. These are the real life stories of entrepreneurs. But before we start, I have one small favor to ask. Please leave a comment. It can be advice, critiques, tips, feedback, or share this with someone because your engagement is the most valuable and most powerful form of social currency. So thank you, and welcome to another episode of Business Bros. All right, business bros, get ready to ignite your cloud operations. Today, we're diving into the world where backlogs, unexpected outages, and team burnouts are a thing of the past. Imagine deploying best practice cloud architectures with integrated observability and security, all without needing to be a DevOps guru. That's the promise of our guest innovation, a platform engineering marvel that's not just simplifying operations, but also making them more affordable and scalable. So stay tuned as we introduce the visionary behind this transformation, Mr. Cory O'Daniel. Correction, O'Daniel. Man, I botched that one up right at the beginning. My bad.
I get called so many things. I'm used to it.
All right, Cory. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to be on here. Let's get this one started. First question I always ask has to do with what you're doing, man. So if you can explain it as simply as possible, I know I gave it the intro, but give me the fifth grader version. What do you do, man?
Oh, okay. Yes. So we're a cloud operations platform. We help people manage cloud infrastructure. Pretty much all of our applications today have to run on some infrastructure somewhere, whether it's in a data center or in the cloud. And our product makes it easy for any engineer in your organization to manage infrastructure without kind of taking on the full burden of cloud operations.
Now that's I'll be honest, that's a handful. What motivated you to even get into this space, trying to simplify cloud operations?
Yeah, so I was a professional services consultant for a while. So that effectively meant that I worked for the clouds. I'd go around the different companies that are trying to either migrate to a different cloud, maybe from Google to Amazon to Google, et cetera, and help them do that migration. And so I was doing that for the past 5 or so years before I started Mass Driver. And then before that, I was a software engineer, worked at a number of startups, founded a couple of startups, and I kept seeing my team members when I was at startups just struggling to comprehend all the things that are the cloud, right? It's not just like the compute that we run, it's security, compliance, best practices, just a whole pile of stuff on top of running anything in the cloud. And so I thought it was a very startup oriented problem. I thought, okay, we got a small team of, very young hackers working on a product. That's why they don't have cloud experience. And then as I started working in these professional services, I was working for multi-billion-dollar companies where they were kind of struggling with the same problems. They would have 400 or 500 software developers, and they'd have 10 cloud operations people. And those 500 people were depending on these 10. And kind of happens there is those 10 people kind of look like bottlenecks. They're trying their hardest. They don't have a budget, right? They're a smaller team. And so I kind of saw the same problem that was existing in startups, existing in multi-billion-dollar companies. So this was the area that I knew, so I wanted to build some software that could kind of take my expertise and extend it to software developers.
Now, I've heard of SaaS products. Yours is a PaaS product. How does it differentiate itself from other solutions in the space that kind of help, making it easier to use? And I mean, this is kind of a double-edged question because of the past thing, but the other one is, what's the difference between that and, let's say, operating like Dropbox, for example? Obviously, there's more complexity to running an organization on the cloud, but I think most people are familiar with a Dropbox cloud system.
Yeah, so I think when you say cloud, so cloud is a term that has sort of lost its meaning over the past couple of years. So when we originally thought of the cloud, we thought of cloud providers like AWS and GCP that kind of sell this compute to companies. So you don't want to run in a data center. You don't want to take on, all the costs of buying this hardware. So you kind of want to lease compute by the minute from one of these big clouds, right? And so over the past couple of years, though, I think the term cloud has kind of expanded to most things that you buy as a service. So you're starting to see other things like storage products like Dropbox be referred to as cloud as well. So when I'm talking about cloud here, I'm talking about the traditional cloud providers: AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, DigitalOcean, etc.
So these are the big boys. This is where essentially companies kind of live and where they operate from. Gives us access to multiple locations, different venues, product lines, all housed in the same place, but not necessarily physically at the same place. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, exactly. So, you might buy services from Amazon, AWS, and they could have, I think they've got, dozens of data centers around the globe that you can kind of deploy your cloud services to and then run your applications on top of. So just because you pick AWS doesn't mean you're done. Doesn't mean you can just throw your application in there. You have to figure out all the different components of AWS that you want to use, how those all tie together, how you apply security and compliance and all your policies to them. And then once you've done all of that, which I just hand waved a lot of work away, once you've done all that, then you can run your application on top of it. And that right there, that gap, or that stuff I kind of hand wave, like that is where we have a massive gap in knowledge on the planet. So 6%-ish of software developers on the planet have experience running on the cloud, which is that's a scary number because
that's really small.
Really small number. And so when you think about it, it's like, okay, like everybody is a software company today, right? Like almost anybody you're into, like no matter what they're doing, if they're doing it online, like they're running some software, whether they're building it directly or they're hiring a company that does the build out for them. And a lot of that software is running on the cloud. And so what's kind of frustrating as a software engineer when you're working at a company is if you don't have a lot of these engineers that understand how cloud works, it kind of becomes your responsibility. And like, I guess probably the best analogy would be like, there's a lot of people that study law, right? There's your accountant and then there's your lawyer. And just because they both are familiar with laws don't mean you want them doing each other's jobs, or they'll be able to do each other's jobs well, right? And so a lot of times we look at software engineers and we're like, oh, their screen's black, they got a keyboard, they can do all the software things. But like we have disciplines that we know and we're experienced at. And a lot of people have like general software development experience in a programming language and no cloud. And now they have to run their applications there. So how do they do that?
All right. So that already, I mean, that is a complicated process. I mean, yeah, you waved your hand over and made it sound super easy, but this is where you live. This is where the operations of what your company does, where it happens. So what are the common pitfalls then? If there's teams that are wanting to place their applications, use that stuff on the cloud, and you're doing that middle work, what are the most common issues that they come across where they go, all right, I need to hire a company like Mass Drivers to come over here and help me solve that problem? What are they experiencing?
Yeah, so we kind of sit like right at the point where you're trying to scale your software team is kind of where we come into play. So when you're deploying to the cloud the first time, you maybe have an application running locally on your computer, or maybe you're using a platform vendor like somebody like Heroku or Vercel, these companies that kind of hide a lot of the cloud from you and just let you have this like high level, very generic abstraction that kind of works for all their customers. I'm gonna throw some big air quotes around that. Now, when you first go to run applications in the cloud, there's just a series of hurdles that kind of trip you up. So the first one is like, how am I going to run my app? AWS has like 10, 15, 20 different ways of running an application. Everything from like a concept called serverless to containers, and there's a bunch of stuff in between. So first off is just trying to figure out like, how do I want to run my app? And then once you figure that out and figure out what service you want to run, then you have to think, well, how do I secure my app? Which sucks, because even less people on the planet have security experience at scale, right? And so the cloud is one of these things where we assume like, oh, it's secure by default. And the cloud is very much not secure by default, right? The goal of the cloud vendors is to be capable, not to be easy. And there's a big distinction there. The reason they want to be capable is they want to be able to capture as much market as possible. It doesn't matter if it's easy. They have professional services that I used to work for that they'll happily sell to you if you can't figure it out, right? And so as you start to get into the cloud, you have to figure out like how you want to run your app, and then all the services that you actually need. And then you got to figure out how to glue them together. And that glue is kind of where MassDriver comes in. Once you start to get an idea of like how you want to run this stuff, we help you kind of piece it all together and make it reproducible. And why this is important is like you frequently have multiple environments. You might have like a testing environment, you might have like a beta environment, and then your production environment. When you get to really big scale companies, you have multiple production environments kind of all around the globe where you're trying to route traffic to. Maybe in East Asia, you want to route some traffic and keep it there so it's fast. Maybe you have stuff in the EU and you have to isolate it because of GDPR, right? So you get to this point where you have lots of these environments. How do you keep them all in sync? How do you minimize the configuration? And that's kind of where we come in. We make it very easy for you to design something once and kind of stamp it out over and over again, whether it's a test environment or whether it's a disaster recovery environment. Maybe you've been hit by a tsunami and you need to bring everything back up on another coast, right? Like, how do you do that? And the cloud kind of like leaves that up to you to figure out.
Isn't it amazing though? Like, I feel the world has become a smaller place thanks to things like the internet. And yet it's become a vastly big place because we can do so much directly on cloud-based systems and avoid big catastrophes. Like you just said, you have a tsunami in one part of the world and you can be operational in another part of the world almost like no problem if we have teams like MassDriver in place to help us do that. So there's a concept that I learned about a little bit in what you do, integrated observability, and you do that within MassDriver. How does it benefit engineering teams? What is it and how does it benefit them?
Yeah, so observability, there's a couple different components to it, but it's effectively like the ability to understand a running system, right? So you've got, let's say, you got a couple of database clusters, maybe you got some compute clusters, some machine learning pipelines. You have a lot of stuff going on in the cloud. You might, MassDriver, like when we use AWS, we use something like 37 different AWS services to make MassDriver, and then there's all of our code on top of that, right? So there's 27 things that kind of had to connect together. So the ability to like understand the health of that and what's working and what's not working is very difficult, right? So there's traditional observability vendors or like dashboards, companies like Datadog, where it's up to your operations team to kind of say, okay, here's the 27 things I'm using. Let's put this on a nice graph and have an idea of like what's healthy or not, right? And so the thing that kind of sucks with that versus how we do it is you have to have an idea ahead of time of what you want to see on this graph, right? And like the whole point of like troubleshooting observability is to figure out what's broken in something that's running at scale for millions of users or billions of users around the globe. So it kind of requires you to be a bit clairvoyant. Like you have to know what your problem is going to be in the future, right? And so a lot of these dashboards are best guesses, really. And a lot of times they kind of grow over time and they kind of get bloated over time. So it's like, okay, it's 2 a.m. Something's broken. What's broken? You go look at your dashboard and you're like, well, it's red. That's not good. But your dashboard might not be able to spell out exactly what the problem is. So then you go hunting and pecking for an hour or two. That's what it is. I found out what it is. I need to update my dashboard to include this. So if this ever breaks again, it's very easy to find. Well, inevitably the next time something breaks, it's probably not that. It's something else that you're going to go do this again. And so the way MassDriver works is part of the way our system makes this so easy is it's visual. So effectively for your software engineers at your company, so you have cloud engineers and software engineers, it's a no-code platform. They literally diagram the cloud, and we build all these cloud components based off of what they diagram. And so as you're sitting in there and like diagramming out what you want, which makes it very easy for you to think about what you're trying to build, we're connecting into the cloud's metrics and observability systems, and we're overlaying that on your diagram. So now instead of you like doing some stuff in some code, trying to build some cloud, and you build some cloud stuff, and then you go over to another system and you're building a dashboard, as you're diagramming something and kind of talking to your team about like what you think the system's going to look like, it's actually building it. So you're not writing any code. And then it's immediately starting to show you the health of that system right on top of your diagram. So you have this picture that kind of shows you how your network works or your clusters work, and then the health of that's showing right on top of it. So you don't have to write the code and then go to another site and like build this dashboard and hope it's right. You always have metrics of your system right there. We know what it is. We know how they're connected. So it makes it very easy for us to kind of dynamically generate and show that information.
And I like how you explain that, because I mean, for a lot of people, visually seeing the process of what you want done is the easier way to kind of think about and develop something. But you have it laid out so that that visual becomes what they're actually looking to create. That's huge. Now, earlier you said security is one of those things that we kind of take for granted. It's not already built in. And you mentioned that that's kind of something that you help with. So how does MassDriver kind of integrate security into its cloud architectures? I'm assuming as it's being developed, kind of like the way you described it.
Yeah. So the way our platform works is you generally have operations engineers on your team and software engineers. And so our product requires that you have some operational people at your organization. We have a concept called a marketplace where you kind of grab stuff if you don't have ops people, but we generally target companies that have a couple of ops people that tend to be a bit underwater, probably the best way to put it. And so what happens is each of the boxes that you put onto your canvas is actually designed by somebody that knows what they're doing. So if you're grabbing something from our marketplace, it's probably coming from one of our cloud architects that builds these clusters. And by default, they have security and compliance packaged into them. But if you have your own operations team, what you can effectively do is write your code for how you're going to manage the cloud. You publish it into MassDriver in this concept called a bundle. So that's the little box that you see on the screen. And we call it a bundle because you can actually bundle a bunch of stuff together. You can take the code that makes the cloud service from AWS, and you can take security and compliance code and package it all into one thing. So instead of your developers having to think of like the code for managing the infrastructure, the code for making sure it's secure, the code for making sure it's HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant, like all these different compliance bodies, your ops team does that once. They put it all together, they package it, they push it into MassDriver, and developers just diagram. So they're essentially diagramming stuff, and we're not randomly generating it. Like we're not generating stuff. We're actually building things from real code that was written by a human that's an expert in that service. So you're getting their security and compliance knowledge bundled in with this code that deploys it. And so that's the first step of what we do. The second step is we run a number of compliance and security tools on your running workloads. So now you have this person that knows security, they built this stuff, they push it up, but people make mistakes, they miss things, right? And so we check for very common things like, are your databases encrypted by default? Is all of your data encrypted by default? And that might sound silly, especially for somebody who might not work in the cloud. If people are listening, you know, they're not software engineers, you're like, wait, why wouldn't things be encrypted by default? Because the cloud doesn't encrypt any of your data by default.
Fair.
Maddening, right? Like,
but we don't know what we don't know, right? That's kind of that's the key.
And that's the funny thing. Like when you see all these breaches, like day in, day out, that are happening, we have breaches every day. Like we have big companies publishing that they had a breach, password breach, this breach, that breach. The cloud by default doesn't have a lot of security constraints applied to it. It's up to your engineers to know how to do it. Again, they want to be capable. They don't want to, lose a customer because everything is encrypted and you can't have things unencrypted by default, right? So it's like, oh, it's up to you to turn it on if you want it. And so there's all of these like defaults that you would expect to be like sane and in place to keep data safe, and they're off and you have to turn them on, right? And so this is one of the things we check for is like, okay, is your data while it's going across the wire encrypted? Is it when it's on disk getting written by the database, is it encrypted? Do you have databases that are publicly accessible? That's not great. But it's very easy to do on accident. And so we have just this like checklist of things that we run, and we'll let you know, like, hey, like you did have somebody build something. They did build it with all of your security in mind, but just a heads up, your databases are sitting on public IP addresses, which means anybody can hit them. Do they know the password? No. But can they guess it with enough tries of a computer? Absolutely. And that's terrifying.
That is scary. We think it's secure. We assume it's secure, and we just don't realize that it's not. All right, MassDriver also promises the end of the era of backlogs and burnouts. So can you kind of elaborate on that? How does your platform achieve that?
Yeah, so kind of going back to those operations engineers, again, there's not a ton of them on the planet, like relative to the number of software developers. There's over 27 million software developers on the planet. Like we have more software developers on the planet than there are people in Australia. Like you'd have a whole continent full of us if you really, really wanted to. And about 6 to 10% of that, and that number is going down year over year. Talk a bit about that if you're interested. About 6 to 10% of those developers have experience in the cloud, right? So we have this very small group of people that have experience in the cloud, but almost everybody that's running in the cloud needs somebody with this expertise, right? A lot of these people work for Google. They work for Amazon, they work for Fang, right? And so you've got a big pool of them that are already kind of not accessible to you if you're, let's say you're Walmart, or you are, some regional bank, right? Somebody who needs to run in the cloud, but you might not be able to have the budget to hire somebody out of Google, right? So now you're kind of hiring these operations engineers that are not at FANG, right? That have this cloud experience, and you're competing for them like everybody else, right? And so what you end up seeing is these operations roles tend to be some of the highest tenured people in software. You'll see 10, 15, 20 years of software development experience. They also tend to be some of the highest paid people in these organizations. So now, let's say you're a Ralph's, which is a grocery store on the west coast of the U.S., and you want to hire operations engineers. Well, there's not a lot of them. You're competing for 6 to 10% of this 27 million people in the world, and any of those operations engineers have tons of tenure, and they can probably get a job at Google or Facebook or Amazon or Netflix. So how do you get them? You probably don't. You don't have $300,000 to $700,000 a year to pay for one of these people. You don't have the most interesting problems in the world, right? Like, let's say you're the waste management company, right? Very important to us, to people picking up trash, but like, how do you convince a very small group of people on the planet to come and work for you versus going and working for a thing, right? And so the reality is these companies will get, a handful of these engineers who are fantastic, but they're vastly outnumbered by their software development teams. So you might have 3, 10, 15 of these operations engineers and 500 or 1,000 software developers. And again, if you're running in the cloud, all these people are kind of depending on this central group. And so what happens a lot of time is they get burned out. They get frustrated as shit. You see animosity kind of build up between these teams. And this was the whole concept of DevOps, if you're familiar with this term. It's like we're trying to get these two teams to cooperate. Like literally it was so bad in the early 2000s, like somebody had to come along and be like, these two teams that work on the same thing should get along. It's like, what? Holy shit. Like you had to tell us that? Like we feel like a bunch of children when you hear like, can you teams get along in all of these companies that they're at odds with each other. And the reason why is the developer's job is to introduce change in pursuit of revenue, right? An operations person's job is to resist change in pursuit of stability. So like they're at odds with each other in their goals. So like, how do you get these two teams to work well together? And this was this idea of DevOps. And so what kind of fell apart was we never really got there as a community. And one of the key reasons is there's just not enough people with this experience. The cloud has continued to get more complicated over the past 15 years. And so the way MassDriver helps with this is we make those operations engineers multiple times more efficient. So today, what happens is if I'm building something in the cloud, I'm sharing it with my engineering partners, and they are going to be asking me for changes all the time. Hey, I need you to add another database. I need you to make this compute cluster bigger. We're moving into the EU and we need to be 100% isolated for GDPR. I need you to clone everything we got in California to the EU. Okay, that's a lot of work. It's very easy for you to ask, right? But it's a lot of work for me. And if I'm outnumbered 10, 20, 30 to 1, I probably got 30 people asking me for things like this. But I also have the CISO asking me. The CFO is probably pissed because we're spending too much money in the cloud. And then I have a boss. So I'm answering to a lot of people day in, day out. And so how can we make those operations engineers more efficient? It's kind of the goal of the platform. And so the way we do this is this bundling technology. Each thing that your operations engineers know, they develop it once. They put all of your company's policies for security, practices, compliance into this same bundle, and they publish it, and they're done. Until they need to make a fundamental change to the way your database clusters are designed and deployed, they only have to do it once. And every time an engineer needs something, they just drag it. So I'm not asking you questions anymore. I'm not saying, hey, I need a new database cluster. Just drag it on. You as the operations person know that it's secure. You wrote the security layer for it. You know it's compliant, and you're able to like track and audit and understand it. So if developers find that something's broken 3 weeks from now, like you have this audit trail. And so it's letting those developers act on their own without the risk of people just kind of guessing their way through stuff. So you kind of get this guardrails around this idea of self-service, and that's what makes it so efficient for operations teams to use it, and what greatly reduces their burnout. So the average ops person per ops engineer that uses our platform finds that they get about 14 hours per person per week back.
That's efficient.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I mean, it really lifts that bottleneck. It doesn't fix the increasing that 6 to 10% of the people who can actually do it, but it eliminates a lot of the workflow that person has to do, and you don't have to duplicate it. The bundles are there. It's kind of easy to launch. You don't have to worry about, everybody telling you what to do. It's easy to address the situation. You're right. The burnout would definitely go away. If people want to find out more about Mass Driver, they're one of those 6 to 10% people, and they're like, yo, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I need. How can they do that? And what does that onboarding process look like? How do you help like the learning curve for a lot of these engineers?
Yeah, so I'm an ops engineer. I've been in this space since 2001-ish, and so me and my team. I have two co-founders. We're all very aware of like how hard an ops person's life is. And hard compared to software developers, not hard compared to like somebody chopping down trees all day. But like you have a ton of people asking you for stuff. You always have pressure from security and finance, right? And so we try to make as much stuff in Mass Driver as pleasant and frustration free as possible for those engineers, right? And so, one of the things that we do is we're not for everybody, and we acknowledge that, right? I mean, I think it's a problem in our space in particular is every company tries to sell to every engineer under the sun, whether or not they're a good fit. And one of the things we try to do very early is let people know if we are not a good fit for them. So like we'll kick people out of our sales pipeline. And so we did this thing recently where we were having people come to demos because it was like, you come to our site, typical enterprise sales, book a demo. They're getting into a demo and we're like 5 minutes into the call and we're like, this isn't a good fit for this company. And so we actually took demos as like our call to action off the site. So one of the first things you do, there's a survey that you take and it'll tell you if we think that you're even a good fit for us. And if you're not, we'll tell you what we think is a good fit for you. And you can even book a call with me or one of my co-founders, and we'll essentially give you recommendations of like other tools you should be looking at if we don't think you're fit. And like the goal is like we want to make sure that we're not getting customers that are going to be frustrated 3 to 6 months from now because they're essentially sold something that wasn't a good fit for them. And at the same time, like these people are probably storing my data or my family's data or somebody I know's data. So I'd love to like if I'm not going to be a good help for them, like at least point them towards like the right product. Yeah. So that's one of the first things that we do is like don't get people into our demo and sales pipeline that don't belong there. And then if you are kind of going through our pipeline, our onboarding, we have something called a cloud adoption framework. And what this is it's a checklist really that we build each team or platform. Them what's their responsibility, but adopting the cloud. So there, I saw some screens reload. Did I lose connection? I'm still here, right?
No, I can hear you. The video did a little bit, but I could hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that onboarding process is a lot of interactions with us. And so the reason why is like a lot of tools like us and some of our competitors, they're not something that you can like start using today. Like you can start using it, but you can't like cut everything over to Mass Driver in a day. Like it is a process to like get us involved in what you're doing and start to roll Mass Driver out within your organization. And all the tools in our space kind of are, right? And so we have a very high touch onboarding program that we do with people coming onto the platform to make sure that they're moving in the right direction. They understand like whose responsibility it is to do like each individual piece of onboarding with Mass Driver. And then we even help them like figure out like where they're missing stuff. So, a lot of times they'll start getting into the platform and they'll be, they will maybe have not codified or written code for most of the stuff they've managed in the cloud. And they may have just clicked around in the AWS dashboard. And the problem with that is like it makes it really hard to reproduce, audit, like add this security layer that we offer. And so we'll suggest to people like, hey, here's some tools that you can use to generate a lot of this code so you can get into the platform faster and also start to have like a better understanding of what you're running in the cloud. And so our onboarding process is effectively customized for every single team that we interact with. And we put a lot into it based on like how many engineers do they have, how many operations people do they have, and like what's their biggest problem right now. So, we have customers that are coming on today that their biggest problem is they're completely failing compliance across the board, and now they're required to be like SOC 2 compliant, or maybe they're a healthcare company and they haven't really paid much attention to HIPAA, and like now they have to, right? And so when we have customers like that come on, we actually go in and help them figure out like where they're missing some stuff in compliance and what tools they can use to figure out where they're non-compliant. And then we'll have other customers that they're just coming on, they're fully compliant, they've got all their security in check, but they can't figure out the best way to start to bring their developers into cloud operations and get them the ability to move a lot faster. And so then it's us just helping them straighten out some cultural problems inside their orgs, like how they hand off work and how they work together as a team. So, we kind of do some like mentorship as well as some hands-on work, as well as just helping people move through our onboarding process.
Boom. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Look, there's a lot to this cloud system that you probably don't realize. And like Cory was saying, a lot of times we got to start off with a survey to figure out exactly where you're at. And you could do that by going to massdriver.cloud, and get yourself started. And like they said, sometimes they're not able to help you, but at least they're going to point you in the direction where you need to go. Experience is going to help you get to the compliant factor that you're looking for, or to get your cloud system running the way you want to. So again, that website is massdriver.cloud. Cory, thank you very much for coming on and sharing with us, man. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Ladies and gentlemen, get your stuff secure. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace. And we're out.
It's over. Go home.
Is your business in need of marketing? Try starting a podcast. But not just any podcast. Podcast like a pro. We can show you how to take your business from being invisible to becoming a brand people trust. Go to www.businessbros.biz to get started today.